In this video we're going to be looking at a GCSE History question which asks you to look at a source and say how useful it is. It's an 8-mark question. The question asks us how useful a source is to an historian studying the work of the Einsatzgruppen in 1941. These were killing squads that were set up in order to murder Jews in Poland and Russia. To answer this question, we're going to use COP, which stands for Content, Origin and Purpose. Content is what the source tells us, origin is where the source came from, who wrote it and where it was written. Purpose is why it was written. Look at the mark scheme. If you copy down words from the source but don't explain how useful it is, you'll get between 1 and 2 marks. If you show that you understand how useful the source is in terms of its content and who wrote it, you'll get 3 to 4 marks. If you show that you can say how useful the source is in terms of what was happening at the time, the special squads being given the task of murdering Jews in countries such as Poland and Russia, and you can give a conclusion as to how useful the source is overall, you'll get 5 to 6 marks. To get full marks, you really need to explain how useful the source is in terms of what was happening at the time, show you understand the content, and explain about the author and purpose of the source and how useful those things make it. The following few slides in this presentation give you background information on how the Nazis' persecution of the Jews intensified in the early years of the war, and in particular tells you about the special killing squads called Einsatzgruppen, who were responsible for rounding up and killing Jews behind the advancing German armies. By 1943, such squads had murdered more than 2 million Jews. Watch the next 2 slides in this presentation now. Let's take a look at how we can answer this question using COP. First, read through the source and highlight or underline the key points. The first important point says that 23 Jews had to be shot, including 2 women. The soldiers had to find the best spot to shoot them and bury them so that the evidence was hidden. This took them a few minutes. Next, the source tells us that the victims or death candidates had to dig their own grave, and that the people had their valuables, including watches and money, taken away from them. Finally, it says that 6 soldiers shot them with 3 bullets aimed at the heart and 3 at the head. As I said, to answer this type of a question, we're going to use COP, which stands for content, origin, and purpose. Content is what the source tells us. Origin is where the source comes from, who wrote it, what sort of source it is, and when it was written. Purpose is why it was written. After identifying the important information, we need to answer the question: how useful is this source to an historian studying the Einsatzgruppen? Look at the example answer. It starts by saying where the source came from. Source A comes from a diary entry from Felix Landau, a member of the Einsatzgruppen, written in July 1941. This leads on to the important information and content and why this is useful. It is useful to an historian as it tells us the Einsatzgruppen gathered large groups of people in Russia. 23 had to be shot. Notice this is a direct quotation from the source and is therefore placed into quotation marks. And killed them with guns. It also tells us how the victims were taken to remote areas, again using direct quotations from the source. We had to find a suitable spot and that they had to dig their own graves. It also tells us that the Einsatzgruppen took victims' valuables and that their killing method was thorough, using 6 bullets for each victim. The next paragraph in the answer is about the author of the source, or the origin, and when and where it was written. This paragraph also begins by explaining how and why the source is useful. The source is useful as it was written by a member of the Einsatzgruppen in Russia in 1941. This means that the author is not only an eyewitness but also a participant in the Einsatzgruppen's activities, and he will know exactly what happened. However, as there is only one member of the Einsatzgruppen, we cannot be sure that this is typical for all members. The final paragraph is about the purpose of the source, or why it was written. Again, this part should start by saying why its purpose makes it useful. Another reason for its usefulness is because it's a diary, so the author is writing in order to keep a record of memories for himself. It's not meant for anyone else. Therefore, he has no reason to be making things up or to lie in his own diary. Now stop the video and answer a question similar to the one here on the notes about the treatment of the Jews during the war on iTunes U. Remember to use COP and watch this video again if you need to.